We are continuing our series where previously we went over the true backstory of the Eisendrache, following on now with the Zetsubou No Shima, aka the PRODITIONE Fracture. We even have a look at an alternative, extended version of Zetsubou No Shima's ending cutscene that makes Takeo's already tragic and horrifying story so much more horrifying. Thanks to the recently leaked Black Ops 3 development documents, we've gotten a much better understanding of the universal fractures within its DLC maps. And in this video, we are going to be dissecting the Zetsubou No Shima fracture, PRODITIONE, and working out the changes to history within with the help from these elite documents. This is a follow-up to my prior video on the fracture from the Giant and the Eisendrache, which you can find linked on screen and in the description. But since it is a follow-up, before we dive into the PRODITIONE fracture and the Zetsubou No Shima, let's quickly refresh on what we learned a fracture truly is in the Black Ops 3 zombie story, especially since it's different from just a regular timeline change. As we explained before, a fracture is a specific type of timeline created when Primis kills one of the original Ultimis / 1.0 characters, Richthofen, Dempsey, Takeo, or Nikolai, at precise moments and places. Considering they were bonded with the elemental shard, they're quite literally the fabric of the entire Etherverse.
You need to stop thinking in terms of originals, old and new. It's not like that. When you look in the mirror, it's still you. If you crack that mirror, you see multiple reflections. It doesn't mean you've actually multiplied, does it? Honestly, I'm not sure why I'm trying to explain it. Shit's fucked up. Please, fix it.
Ah, that's the trouble with Element 115. I am it, and it is me.
These kills aren't just about eliminating them in one universe. They are strategic strikes to remove these characters from multiple universes at once, preventing a ripple effect caused when a fracture creates multiple other fractures, which creates multiple other fractures, etc, etc. And by us, collecting their souls in the summoning key and drastically altering both the past and future around these events. This shattering of history is what we call a fracture, and our main four were the reasons for the breaking and shattering of the universe itself. The shattering of history is what we call a fracture, and each one gets a unique name to track its changes. Before we jump into Zetsubou No Shima's fracture, I first want to do a side tangent on the term 1.0 for the characters versus the term Ultimis, as I think this becomes a point of confusion for some people. People know that the term Ultimis is used to refer to the World at War / Black Ops 1 version of the original characters, but in Black Ops 3's development documentation, and in many videos surrounding the game, even mine, you'll hear the versions of the characters we kill who are visually identical to Ultimis characters be called 1.0. This is even the term that Blundell and other developers use throughout Black Ops 3's life cycle, and 1.0 is even how things are referred to internally at Treyarch, and I believe it was referenced in some of the radios or ciphers back then, which is where the name was coined. And bear in mind, this was even before the term Ultimis had been coined, before we only heard the name Primis. This is because the term Ultimis refers to that crew in parallel to the name Primis, and simply did not exist, as I said, during this point in time. At least not publicly to us, the community. I don't know if Treyarch had it in the back of their minds or if this was a concept they came up with closer to Zombies Chronicles. As the first time the word Ultimis is ever used in Zombies is actually used in the COD Zombies timeline released alongside Zombies Chronicles. In that timeline, to make it easier to track the various playable crews, the names Ultimis and Victis were conceptualized to match the name Primis. Before that, the characters we collect the souls of were simply referred to as the 1.0s, since they were the ones we were introduced to first. However, in our sake, for these specific videos, there's actually kind of a benefit to that. While calling Richthofen 1.0 in the Giant Ultimis Richthofen would be kind of entirely accurate, as they are literally the same Richthofen, at least before the fracturing, it gets a bit more complicated the further we go. By the time we even encounter Dempsey and Eisendrache, for example, history has already drastically warped. Without Richthofen to experiment on Dempsey and so drastically drastically distort his personality, if he awoke, he would likely not be anything like the Ultimis Dempsey counterpart that we know. And so the term 1.0 helps us now to denote that we are specifically discussing the versions of Ultimis from these fractures, with far different pasts and potentially different personalities. But even the term 1.0 I don't feel is much of an accurate one, because again, the reason the term 1.0 was coined was because they were the very first versions of these characters we were introduced to, even though Primus means the first, and Ultimus the last, which is literally the opposite of 1.0 and 2.0. And considering that there was a near infinite amount of cycles that would have played out, we only get a mere glimpse at some of these fractures. We know they killed many other versions of the other characters over and over and over again. They can't all be regarded as 1.0 versions just due to the fact that there are many. Regardless, it makes it much easier to distinguish between the original versions of Ultimus we saw from World at War to Black Ops 1, then back in Classified onwards, and the changed, fractured versions of themselves from these splinters. Last time, we explored the DECEPTIO Fracture, which began when Primus Richthofen killed Ultimus/1.0 Richthofen at the Giant on October 13th, 1945. Now in this case, with this Richthofen, because we kill him and don't see him really play out anymore, he's basically one and the same as his Ultimus self. But the same can't be said for the others. This act splintered the original timeline, rewriting history in wild ways. Suddenly, Group 935 had access to massive amounts of Elements 115, way more than in the original timeline, leading to technological leaps like giant robots appearing at Der Riese, which were not present within the original version of the map. And this was the past retroactively changing and filling in the what would be future from the past, but our present. The fracture also erased disasters at other 935 sites, like the zombie outbreaks at Nacht and Verrukt, which never fell to chaos, which is what the alternative Kino der Toten loading screen was supposed to represent in the comic books that we explored in that last video. Most shockingly, Maxis took control of Group 935's moonbase and MPD excavations, roles originally tied to Richthofen's rebellion. Without Richthofen's betrayal, Maxis led a stronger, unified 935, supplying Germany with advanced weapons and robots, making them a dominant force in the war. By November 5th, 1945, at the Eisendrache, Primus pursued Group 935 to Griffin Station, following them in the giant robot, destroyed the moon, and recovered the 1.0 Dempsey pod, whose soul was secured after Primus Dempsey shut off his life support. Right after I posted the previous video as well, I saw a video on Twitter that we originally meant to include in the last part and forgot to edit it in, a clip of Jason Blundell passing on a question from Milo that very much goes in line with exactly how we pieced together the true story of Der Eisendrache's fracture to work.
Does the Maxis of the Der Eisendrache universe know about the moonbase in Der Eisendrache?
Yes.
So there's a distinction there between that Maxis' knowledge and the Maxis in the Black Ops 1 story arc.
Pass.
Okay.
And we finally know the true answer to Blundell's mystery. Something we probably would have never sussed out if it weren't for these leaks, which I think is tantamount to their importance. Whilst this definitely would have not been as fun if we discovered it during the time of Black Ops 3, we would have known too much, it's been almost a decade. A decade later, it's now time to really start to suss out the true mysteries of Black Ops 3, and bring new life to a long since abandoned story, with perfect time for the original characters on the precipice to return later this year. Let's tie up those loose threads and get prepared for their comeback. But why does this matter? Because killing 1.0 Dempsey at Der Eisendrache didn't just end at the DECEPTIO Fracture. It shattered time again, warping the already altered history of DECEPTIO into a new fracture, the PRODITIONE Fracture. This is the timeline where Zetsubou No Shima takes place, and its warped history builds directly on the changes we saw in DECEPTIO, likely Maxis' dominance and 935's unchecked power. Understanding DECEPTIO's shifts helps us see how time twisted further after Dempsey's death, setting the stage for the bizarre world of Zetsubou's PRODITIONE Fracture, and beyond into Gorod Krovi. So, we know the prior fracture, DECEPTIO, meaning deception in English, likely was named that based on the fact the events within are built upon a lie. Richthofen did not need to kill his 1.0 self, as his soul was already in the house as he had collected it from a child version of himself from Dimension 2210. He simply faked collecting his soul when reaching down in the giant's intro on his deceased body to make the other characters think he collected his soul, so they were more likely to go along with his plan to collect the rest of their souls. They couldn't trust him if they thought he was lying from the very beginning. Eddie is a liar. But even though this was all just a mirage, this still fractures history in a way that benefits Primus Richtofen, and he lies to Dempsey about needing to kill himself in the giant only to set him up to do the same. So that means the Zetsubou Fracture name, PRODITIONE, must be thematically appropriate as well. And PRODITIONE means treason or betrayal. And as we explore the events of this fracture and piece it together with stuff from the leaked developer documents, it will become apparent why. Let's begin with the official timeline segment on this fracture. April 12th, 1942. Overrun by the undead, the Rising Sun facility is lost, which is Shi No Numa. July 8th, 1942, Division 9 begins construction of the island facility. October 9th the same year, with construction complete, Division 9 continue their projects at the island facility. November 5th, Takeo is dispatched by the Emperor to oversee the work of Division 9 at the island facility. Now we move into the next year, February 6th, 1943. Division 9 expands experimentation to include use of prisoners of war. Division 9 staff, arachnids, and mystical beasts, dragons. June 15th the same year, Takeo reports to the Emperor the work being done at the island facility is unacceptable. June 24th, on the order of the Emperor, Takeo is taken prisoner by Division 9. He is used as a test subject for their organic, plant-based experiments. We move into 1945 on September 13th. Cornelia Pennell attempts to send a transmission to Peter McCain, telling him to rendezvous at the abandoned Rising Sun facility. Yes, in this fracture, Cornelius is a woman and not a man going by the name Cornelia, showing there would probably be women versions of all of the main characters in alternative history. October 18th the same year, Zetsubou No Shima takes place. Primus secures Takeo's soul after they help him commit seppuku. Richtofen takes the crew to Dimension 63 to collect their blood for the insurance policy. They return to the island before traveling to the next destination. Finally, the last known event in this timeline is October 18th, 1945, when Peter McCain makes his jump into Shi No Numa as the temporal rift opens below him. As a result of Primus's universe fractures, the rift teleports him to Gorod Krovi. One thing we can take note of here is the date of Zetsubou No Shima, October 1945. This puts it prior on the timeline to the events of Der Eisendrache, explaining why the moon isn't destroyed yet, even though it's the same timeline. This is exactly what I stated before. When a fracture occurs, it's not just the future events changing from that point onwards. Ripples are sent backwards and forwards in time, changing the past that shapes the present and future. A big question when Zetsubou No Shima rolled around was, why on earth is the map not just completely flooded or going into chaos, as the destruction of the moon would completely change the gravity of the world and it would be a tumultuous, disastrous event. Yet the world remains unscathed. And under Eisendrache, maybe we never experienced that either because we are at the epicenter of said fracture, allowing us to see things through a clearer lens. And it makes sense why they had to set Zetsubou No Shima whilst it is in the same fracture before the events of the moon being destroyed, so they didn't have to think about all of the immediate repercussions. Obviously, the sea level would start rising suddenly, the whole earth would probably tremble, the gravitational pull of literally everything would be impacted immediately, but everything seemingly remains calm under Eisendrache. It's probably just due to game design reasons. It's probably too difficult to implement from a gameplay perspective, so they just kept things simple. Whilst it's not realistic, they probably just strayed away from realism in this instance because it's probably too crazy to really accurately be portrayed. This, however, is just the surface. A lot more is already buried in the game thanks to some radios and ciphers across the Eisendrache and Zetsubou. The way most of the ciphers work in Black Ops 3 is that they discuss the next map in the DLC cycle as a reward for solving them. So most of the Eisendraches are about Zetsubou, and Zetsubous are about Gorod Krovi, and so on. It makes you wonder if a lot of the Revelations ones are actually about Black Ops 4, considering the one that has been solved about Dempsey is a teaser for that game as well. well. Most of the Eisendrache ciphers help set up the worlds that we see explained in the timeline, the birth of the spiders and the dragons, Division 9 and Group 935 working together, and the establishment of this base on the island facility. For example, we have two here, one being Division 9 has completed the resurrection of the ancient beast for your eastern front. We expect Group 935 to reciprocate the favour. And after the success at the Rising Sun facility, Division 9 is moving with Phase 2. The island facility is now operational and initial testing underway. However, thanks to the developer documents, we can figure out exactly where this island is. Thanks to the pitch PowerPoint for this map, we can learn the map is based on POHNPEI, specifically around the ruins of Nahn, which of course we knew this map was going to be here from the Shadows of Evil scraps of paper, where one of the coordinates led to here, but we can see it clearly outlined in the documents. It's here we also learn exactly why we see all of the crashed planes on the island. The PowerPoint reads as follows: the 115 meteors on the island cause strong fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field in the area. These pulses wreak havoc on mechanical instrumentation. Thus, many of the planes that have entered the airspace have crashed on the island. This amount of 115 is something that's important and that we will come back to later in the video, so keep it in mind. What we can also learn from the documents is the history of Nan Sapwe. In the pitch deck for the map, we get a short brief. The Skull of Nan Sapwe, or Sapwe depending on however you want to pronounce it, the Thunder God, is a special weapon and is a reward to all players after completing the cooperative challenge. See Olosohapa's challenges. It has ancient engravings carved into its surface. These tie into the mythology of POHNPEI, the real-world island inspiring Zetsubou's setting. Olosohapa is a figure from Pohnpeian lore, one of the two brothers who arrived on the island and built Nahn, a massive stone complex of canals and temples. And the inspiration for the ruins we find the skull inside. He's seen as a founder, his story symbolizing skill and creation, which fits the idea of altar challenges testing your worth. After his brother died, Olosohapa became the first ruler of Pohnpei's Saudalur dynasty. Nan Sapwe, meanwhile, is Pohnpei's thunder god, linked to storms and justice. His myth involves sparking rebellion against that same dynasty, representing power and judgment. In Zetsubou No Shima, the Skull of Nan Sapwe weapon draws on his commanding presence, used in rituals at those altars. We learn even more about Nan Sapwe from the docs if we take a look at another file. In the feature requests spreadsheet, we won't initially see anything related to Nan Sapwe. However, about halfway down the list, there is an entry for a feature called Keeper Skull, which is surely the skull of Nan Sapwe, obviously. In the description of the item, we get the following. The skull is a powerful weapon and tool left behind by the Keepers to help halt the interdimensional destruction of the Apothicons. The skull can fire off a devastating energy beam from its mouth. It can also be used as a torch to reveal hidden puzzle clues. This tells us that the skull is an item actually intentionally left behind by the Keepers themselves. It differs from the current assumptions, which were that Nan Sapwe was some kind of rogue/individual keeper who chose to stay on Earth and watch over these islands, protecting them. The solution made the most sense at the time, especially considering the fact that if Keepers had interacted with humanity this freely all of the time, they'd surely be more historically known in the original timeline, which this was supposed to be taking place in. Nan Sapwe is or was one of the scattered Keepers catapulted through space-time upon the fracturing of the universes when Richtofen teleported the Walnut for the very first time. Pre-John Dee's ascension, he protected this island from the incoming Apothicon hordes. And the distant monster Easter egg is one of these Apothicons that tried to infiltrate the island, seemingly.
Only a fool would dare to change history.
I am no fool.
However, now that we understand far more about how fractures work and the consequences on the universe of it, particularly an increase in element 115 and the Apothecon's access to these universes, it makes complete sense why the Keepers would, in this fractured history, take more of an active hand in protecting humanity. We'd already seen Ludwig Maxis studying a Keeper's skull back in the Eisendrache slideshow, which before this document was kind of an oddity. oddity. We all just kind of figured, I guess all of these characters just knew about Keepers and never talked about it. But now we know that history itself was being fractured and changed. The Maxis who left the radios in Deriz that we hear had never seen or heard of the Keepers. But as the universe breaks around us, we see history changing. And by the time we are in these fractures, his history is staunchly different. So, in essence, during Shi No Numa, when we play it prior to any of the fracturing, this island facility does not exist because the extra 115 is not spewed into this universe yet. But once it is, the way history plays out is very different. History changed and Maxis was always studying the Keepers. Essentially, in the Eisendrache fracture, as well as Zetsubou's, Keepers were a lot more present throughout the timeline, and a lot more known, as it was a lot more unstable and they needed to be more present, as they required more protection from them. Speaking of Shi No Numa, let's discuss a couple more ciphers. I shut down the power for the night. We must conserve the gasoline, so I am told. Because the Emperor is in doubt of the usefulness of our research here at the Rising Sun facility, and that resupplying the facility will now occur every other month rather than our usual scheduled weekly drops. Hopefully the new meteor site produces higher grade samples, ones we can actually use. Is that a plane I hear? The resupply is not scheduled for another week. I see a bright light in the sky. While the loss of the Rising Sun facility was unfortunate, the Emperor was so impressed with our final results that he has approved the construction of the new Division 9 facility on the island we selected. He assured me personally that he will spare no expense in advancing our research. You and I both know what we will accomplish. At this new facility, we will win the war for Japan. These two ciphers help to tell the story of what happened with Shi No Numa in this fracture, and combining this with everything we learned about the prior fracture and how it works thanks to the developer documentation, we can piece together a far more accurate story. So, in the initial fracturing with the removal of Richtofen, we saw in the remade Kino de Toten comic loading screen that killing him fractured the past and prevented the falling of a few different 935 facilities he had been involved in. Nacht Verrukt and Shi No Numa, overrun by the undead. However, these ciphers tell us how eventually the Rising Sun facility would still fall, so that Division 9's primary base would end up being in POHNPEI instead. So, in the last video, we learned that the universe being fractured means each universe can be exposed to more 115 than ever before. And in this new fracture, 935 had gotten access to much larger amounts of 115 than before. This is interesting because this lesser amount they had before already includes the 115 meteor at the Rising Sun facility. And now we are seeing how this even more increased amount of 115 is changing the way the Japanese work around it. Instead of harnessing their work around the Rising Sun facility and its singular meteorite, which at the time was the single largest 115 deposit in the original timeline, the Japanese government and Division 9 now have access to multiple large meteors on the island of POHNPEI, with much more 115. This means that the majority of resources for Division 9 are now diverted to the POHNPEI Island site, leaving the Rising Sun facility getting far less than before. The resupplies become fewer and fewer, and eventually the facility is lost, likely overrun by the undead in the wake of the rift in the sky we hear about. Speaking of the rift and the plane, this rift that's opened by the Fracture's premise crate, according to the timeline that Peter McCain falls through, might be related to the death of Dempsey. We saw that characters whose lives were changed by Richtofen get their fates adjusted when he was fractured out of time. And since Dempsey was only ever sent into 935's hands on a mission to save the captured Peter, it may be possible that his removal means that Peter doesn't land in Shi No Numa, hanging there. Instead, he plunges through the portal, which we then grab onto his falling body in the Gorod Krovi intro cutscene. He's teleported through, thus removing a reason for the team to ever be sent in. This would make sense to what is said in the timeline, and we can just make this more specific observation thanks to what we learned about fractures in the prior video. The distinct lack of Dempsey in Richthofen would also likely mean that 935's test subject division, holding the members of different nations, would almost certainly no longer exist, as evidenced by der Eisendrache. Dempsey is clearly their prime test subject, and without the scientist who originally ran it, Richthofen, and their prime test subject, Dempsey, instead each would-be test subject is simply left to their respective nations. This means that Takeo is left in Japan. This explains why in the Giant we say we need to awaken the test subjects.
The future hangs by a thread. You must awaken the test subjects.
Well, the past has changed. The test subjects no longer end up there, and like I say, end up in the hands of their irrespective nations.
Takeo Masaki, I did not believe I would find you in such a place. I am sorry, but I bring bad news of the Emperor. He is not as honorable as you believe.
We begin to piece together his story with some ciphers and hidden papers, culminating in a paper on the ground in the Zetsubou No Shima boss room. Cipher 11. After sending him on countless suicide missions, he refuses to die. He is in your hands now. Don't fail us. We then have his letter.
To my beloved Emperor, it has been several months since I last received orders from you, and I cannot help but say that I am at my wit's end. However, despite being directly dispatched by you, they regard my work with suspicious eyes. As such, I have been barred from and forbidden access to almost all research areas. The situation continues to worsen. The installation commander ordered me to hand over my weapons for the duration of my stay. If he had not shown me the relevant papers, ordering me to comply to maintain security, marked with your signature and seal, I would no doubt have objected. I have never raised any doubts whatsoever concerning your judgment, sir. But I am concerned that these circumstances may prove a great hindrance to my mission. I understand how important the Alliance is for our righteous cause and final victory. But the influence of the German operating force Group 935 has become increasingly worrisome. Over the last few months, the number of officers they have here has increased. I cannot help but think that it is they who are preparing the plan. Judging by what I have seen, the research done by Division 9 has been far beyond acceptable. In fact, their aberrational methods of weapons research can only be described as abnormal. Not only do they use prisoners of war for living body tests, but they have also been trying to control the supernatural powers of Element 115. I therefore think that if we permit them to continue their work, dark clouds may soon loom over our great country. I, your foolish servant, will continue to watch them and will report to you wherever possible. If the idea so pleases you, I think it is necessary that you intervene directly in order for us to better understand the aim of Division 9's research and to make clear the ramifications of their plans. I hope you receive this message. Your humble servant, Takeo Masaki.
The samurai era, with its Bushido code of honor and loyalty, faded in the 1870s during Japan's Meiji Restoration. Nearly 70 years before 1.0 Takeo's death in Zetsubou No Shima in 1945. In the PRODITIONE Fracture, Takeo's unwavering samurai ideals, outdated in a modern war defined by science and betrayal, made him a folklore. Beloved by the people, but a threat to the Emperor's authority.
No mortal could hope to achieve victory against such an evil. From the ashes, we can rebuild. I will not make the same mistake again. I felt for a moment as if my ancestors were calling to me. It is a shame that violence is required to facilitate lasting peace.
Branded a traitor and sent to Division 9's island by the Emperor, his popularity and rigid honor likely unnerved a regime built on control. Someone like the Emperor was willing to allow the evil experiments in order to win the war. But Takeo's old-fashioned Bushido code of honor made him have a staunch problem with it.
For so long, I have slain only demons. The killing of men that is another matter.
And his popularity among the people meant that if he ever went public, he may be a worthy political rival to the Emperor. So, the Emperor began to send him on suicide missions, but he kept returning alive. Finally, in his frustration, he hands Takeo over to Division 9, expecting him to not withstand, to be killed. In the Zetsubou No Shima ending cutscene, Takeo's seppuku, a samurai act of honor restoring by taking your own life, becomes his final act of samurai defiance, rejecting the Emperor's betrayal and reclaiming his legacy through an honorable death. Speaking of that ending, we actually get a bomb dropped on us from the leaked documents here. In each map, there are scripts that were given to the voice actors that we can also read, and in the script for the Zetsubou ending, there is a big section cut from the middle with a large strike through. I'll play the cutscene up to where it normally goes and then read the new bits for you.
Your eyes, I recognize them. Almost as though they were my own. Takeo Musaki. I did not believe I would find you in such a place. I was a warrior. I fought many great battles for the glory of our nation, for the honor of the dying samurai spirit. I was a hero. I share this memory. I have lived many of the same victories. I later learned that my victories were unwelcome. His betrayal was driven by petty jealousy. He knew I could endure anything, that I feared not even my own death.
I was exiled to this island on his orders. We look towards a metal cage suspended from the ceiling outside Takeo 1.0's cell. Inside, we see human remains, almost skeletal, but still shrouded in layers of dried or rotting skin. Takeo is struggling to come to terms with seeing himself in such a situation. Primus Takeo says, "Who is this soul who met such a fate?" We then get a close-up of Takeo 1.0, where he says, "You do not remember her. Beat. Perhaps that is a blessing." Takeo 1.0 continues, a faint smile appearing on his face, a smile that soon fades. Takeo 1.0 continues, "They brought her here a year after my arrival. At first we were happy to be in each other's company after so long. Beat. Despite her shackles, we had hope. We believed that rescue or escape would soon find us. Beat. We prayed to the spirits. They did not answer." As Takeo 1.0 continues, they see the somber expressions of the group.
Mercy will find us. But I am at peace. I understand what must be done. Will you be my kaishakunin? It is my honor.
Guess it's you next, Nikolai.
Nine. There is something else we must know. There is a chain of events that must be set in motion. Call it our insurance policy, in case we don't like where we end up.
And then, in another one of the documents, this time the asset request spreadsheet, just like the one we looked at for the Eisendrache, we can spot a request for a model for Takeo's girlfriend for in-game cutscene. This asset, however, is marked as priority 5, the lowest potential priority mark for an asset. This suggests it was likely cut for time. Had it made it, however, we would have seen a bigger glimpse into Takeo's personal life and history, and frankly, an even worse fate for him in Zetsubou No Shima than he had already experienced. He he would have had to have watched the love of his life die right in front of him, only to find out it was on the orders of the person he respected most. We actually see this alluded to in his Memories trailer, as we see his wife or girlfriend behind him in the temple, suggesting that it was cut extremely late and is still seemingly considered something canon, if only internally and not reflected in this cutscene. It also makes the Monty line from Revelations about Takeo suffering more than any of the others make far more sense.
The extent of Takeo's suffering at the hands of Division 9 is far, far worse than you can imagine.
Takeo really did suffer more than we ever could have imagined. Not just this, but even with the spiders, which I will have a video coming out before or after this one. This line from Revelations is probably even referencing the fact that we never learned about the death of Takeo's girlfriend because most of the evidence was cut from the in-game. But now, thanks to the documentation leaks, we can really deep dive Black Ops 3 like this and learn a lot more about what the developers were trying to tell us. While I understand people wanting it to remain a mystery because they enjoy that more, I think after a decade or so since the game has come out, I'm much happier to finally be getting a lot of the answers we have been looking for years. Because again, we really could have never sussed this out on our own. Takeo's girlfriend or wife is literally lying there deceased in one of the cages of the boss fight. We just never see. How horrifying. This all gives us a much better idea of the world leading up to Zetsubou No Shima's events, and the fate of the world at the time we killed Takeo, which puts us in a perfect place to leave for now, and we can return to this in the next video of this series, where we will cover the next fracture and how history is changed around Gorod Krovi due to the fracture that Takeo 1.0's death causes. Now, I did already touch on this briefly in the video I did on Reznov's true story on Gorod Krovi. I'm going to go a lot more in depth in this follow-up. I don't mean to end on such a sad and somber note, but Zetsubou No Shima is narratively one of my favorite maps, and atmosphere-wise, it was so hated at the time, but it has such a level of depth, and Takeo's story, I think, is the most compelling, honestly, out of all of the 1.0 versions. He has such a sad story, and it really is so emotional. It's truly such an underrated cutscene. I remember when it was first beaten, people were triggered so much that the Easter egg was just a few steps, and people felt underwhelmed by the cutscene because they didn't think it did enough. It didn't do something crazy like blowing up the moon under Eisendrache, but that wasn't the point of this cutscene. It's all about the emotional depth of Takeo and his character, and his premise self reconciling with the revelation that he was betrayed by the one he cherished the most. It is two versions of the same person having to literally reconcile with each other and hold on to each other, and his premise self aids him with the mercy killing, allowing him to die with honor. What a more fitting conclusion to someone so tied to Japanese ancestry and traditions, as much as the suffering hurts. But without further ado, I'll see you with that next video on Gorod Krovi's fracture. It doesn't feel like a fitting place to conclude with my regular outro, so all I'm going to say is bye.